Good afternoon, everyone watching across the world, live and on demand. It gives me great pleasure to welcome the team at IrisGuard, Eva Mowbray and Simon Reed, who are going to be spending the next 20 minutes with us sharing their cloud solutions and digital inclusion strategy for the Iraqi market. So without further ado, welcome, virtual round of applause to both of you, and looking forward to the next 20 minutes. Good luck.
Thank you, Jared.
Lovely, great. Thanks very much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eva Mowbray, the Marketing Director for IrisGuard, and I'd like to introduce Simon Reed, who's our Deputy Director and also Acting Sales Director. It's great to be here with everybody. It's been a fantastic event so far. So without further ado, we're going to crack on. Simon, would you mind just giving us a very brief introduction to IrisGuard and our services, please?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Eva. And yeah, it's nice to be back in Iraq, albeit virtually. This is my third time, I think, in so many years, as I was explaining, and each time it's a different and very interesting topic. So I'm delighted to be here to do this. So just very, very briefly for you all, IrisGuard, it's our 20th anniversary this year, actually, which we're all very pleased about. And our role is to provide, particularly at the moment, iris recognition and iris-based services for financial inclusion. And I'll go into that in a lot more detail through the questions. We are based in the UK, but we have our main operational office actually in Amman, in Jordan. And it's from there that we operate under one main contract with the UNHCR for the provision of services, both registration and daily ongoing payment services and verification for a variety of different aid from there, handling 5 countries, of which Iraq is included within that territory. And when we get into a little bit more detail, I'll explain actually specifically what we're doing, obviously, in Iraq. And it's an interesting country in that sense, challenging, we know, but our actual specific business involvement goes back now to 2018, when we first started to work with Iraq eGate on the pensioner system as well. So, but we'll come back to that through the course of the thing. And obviously, anyone wants to ask any specific questions, this is a fireside chat, so you can throw in any fireside questions, which I'll be delighted to answer. Okay, thank you, Eva.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for the introduction, Simon. Yes, I mean, we're talking about digital transformation, inclusion. Clearly, the ability to pay and save and borrow is crucial for digital inclusion and transformation. How can modern digital technologies and cloud platforms specifically help develop strong and secure payment systems, which, crucially need to be accessible to the poor and the vulnerable?
Good question. I mean, I think the main statement to make is that in order to provide financial inclusion, you have to have some form of digital inclusion. I mean, that's one of the key factors. I know Iraq itself, through the central bank initiative during COVID, allowed certain relaxation in eKYC so that people could actually get on board with wallets. And I'll come back to that issue in a moment. But yeah, digital inclusion is the most important. And we're dealing with vulnerable populations. Iraq has, according to the latest estimates, nearly 2 million people who are in need of some form of assistance. Obviously, there's a fairly large refugee base there as well, and we are in a position to try and serve those. But those are people who are on the margins in many instances, and are supported by a whole variety of agencies that we actually work with. So UNHCR, we work with WFP, the World Food Programme, and around about 40 NGOs as well across the region. And this is all predicated and based upon having a proof of life. And that is the key element that IrisGuard provides. We link in with existing registration systems, with existing financial systems. And what we do is provide that very important proof of life, utilizing just the iris as a recognition system. Now, we're talking about cloud and security and the handling of data. Our main contract with UNHCR, the cloud for refugee databases, and we have over 5.5 million refugees registered on that. That's located in Geneva. We have schemes that run in Jordan for paying out into camps for WFP on the blockchain, and that actually doesn't even reside within the country. The whole system is outside of that. So somebody who comes into there in a very challenging environment actually is linking into an incredibly sophisticated system, but in fact it's utilizing the power that may or may not exist within the actual country itself. Iraq is a relatively developed country in terms of its power and infrastructure, but it can be very challenging, and holding data is also a big issue as well. We'll come back to that element, but strong payment systems absolutely rely upon verification that the person that you're providing those services to is the right person who stood there or who's accessing your services. And our systems over the last particularly 8 years, which is when we started to work with the UNHCR, have identified nearly 26% fraud, and in fact in some instances over that as well. And that is fraud which is defined as people who are receiving benefits or aid or taking out of the system who are actually not entitled to. They're using somebody else's card, for instance. They are actually bought it from somebody else, or in fact they've had 2 registrations and they haven't been deduplicated within a proper system. Those are immense figures. Now, we're all lived through COVID times. We're living through COVID times, and the sort of average, the figure globally for humanitarian aid is around about $100 billion that is provided for countries. And obviously the World Bank is involved in providing funding for countries, not just specifically for humanitarian, but for development of the poor, the social needy. And all of those countries who provide that, those main donors, are being squeezed themselves over the next few years in terms of being able to provide this value. And so it's really, really important that actually that aid, that money gets to the right people and is not overused. Just to use one figure, which I think is a very stark figure, in the Syrian crisis alone, if we add up the actual fraud and the potential through the system before we started to verify exactly who was entitled to that, it equates to around about $1.4 billion. And that in reality is over 6.5 million people who could have been supported on a monthly basis throughout that. So strong systems that are fit for purpose and have been deployed in a holistic sense that make sure that you connect much of the infrastructure as possible that is already existing, add that proof of life, and you have very strong systems which can digitally include people and then allow them to be included financially.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you've also mentioned COVID, which is, I suppose, a really good segue onto the next topic that we want to discuss in a bit more detail. Because the pandemic health crisis has, if anything, highlighted how technology plays an increasingly important role. How have we adapted our services to meet the increased demand whilst ensuring safety, minimizing risk of transmission, guaranteeing that, like you've just been saying, benefits are delivered to the right people, given all the challenges that we have gone through in terms of the logistics and access and so on?
Right. Good question. Well, this I think addresses very specifically our work in Iraq, and we, since 2019, we together with Zain, under the Zain Cash system, we are supporting UNHCR refugees in Kurdistan, right? And this, there are around about 40,000 individuals who are supported under this scheme, around about 6,500 households. And that scheme, when it was set up, was so that they would go to the stations inside a mall, inside a shopping area, etc. And there are around about 70 stations that are equipped either with a fixed device or, in fact, actually using this, which is one of our Android mobile phones, which is specifically designed that has iris recognition cameras on the front and the rear. Very easy to be portable, etc. Now, obviously, fits in. Zain, one of the two big mobile operators in the region, and so we had to be something mobile. But the more important point on this was that whilst when COVID actually hit, obviously those people who are relying upon getting cash out and relying upon getting some form of service could not go to those centres. They were shut down. So what happened? Was the service interrupted? No. And in fact, we not only continued the service, but in fact, due to both winterization and COVID issues, the amount of aid actually distributed and being put forward to refugees and people in need actually increased as well. So bizarrely, more was actually put through a system. How did we do it? We actually had a Zain Cash employee going out with a phone. This is a 2G, 3G, 4G phone. It'll work on as long as there's some form of connectivity. It'll actually also work offline as well. You can come back and then do a deduplication outside, but works pretty well on 2G in less than 3 seconds. Mm-hmm. And they were going out with a bag of cash. We have various pictures, etc., on this as well that show you how the system works. Going out with a bag of cash, not only verifying them as a person entitled to deliver that cash, but also then verifying the refugee. Outside, difficult environments, very difficult, wearing masks as well. Iris only needs just sight and visibility of the iris. So the scheme continued uninterrupted throughout that period as well. And in fact, in Jordan, where we also support the refugees there through Cairo Bank, there they were actually with a mobile van going out there so that they could go into the areas where they're. The important part about this, and this isn't just my words either, this is what the UN and also organizations like CALP, the Cash Learning Partnership, of which we are members. There are 150 companies and organizations a member of that. Between them, they collectively distribute over 80% of the world's aid in cash and voucher assistance. So this is a fairly influential group. They're seeing increases in the service for cash going up by around about 20% per annum. But one thing that they really highlighted was that whatever technology you put in place, whatever systems are around, you don't put them in just for the crisis. You put them in, you establish them, and then when things change, if they're good systems, they can adapt to this as well. Our initial contract with UNHCR was for a registration system, purely a registration system. Now we've put over $2.5 billion through the system, and that is for daily services. But that was based upon then using that registration in a real sense with people who didn't have access to those types of normal facilities that we might see in more of the developed world as well. So these, I think nobody should wish COVID upon the world at all, but it demonstrated to us a lot of things that we're being saying about the use of proof of life. Proof of life is now a phrase that is being used in many other areas, a COVID passport, vaccination certificates, all of this stuff. It's all very well, but here in the UK, I've had my jab. So has Eva as well. And what were we given? We were given a very sophisticated electronic versus system. No, we were given a piece of card, right? And this is in the delights of the UK. So it's often in times of stress, in times when things are difficult, this is when proper systems that are designed right from the start. And this is therefore, 8 years with the UNHCR, but 12 years before that to make sure that the hardware was working, that our software was working, that we could run cloud-based systems that would allow hundreds of millions of records to be processed in less than 3 seconds anywhere in the world. And we've handled over 126 trillion cross matches with 0 false acceptance. So Simon was never identified as Eva. And that's really important for us as well. So these are words coming from the ecosystem that we actually operate in, not ourselves. That systems should be performant, they should be adaptable, and they should be for the long term as well. And also capable of allowing other parties to enter into the system as well. So adaptable to it, to allow new service providers, for instance, new banks, new ways of doing things. And that is exactly what we did with mobile sector as well. Mobile wallets, huge. I think, was it the figures that 103% of Iraqis actually have a mobile account. So
I believe, yes.
Yep, 75% on the internet. Only 23% actually have a bank account. So, that tells you the ecosystem we need to develop in.
It shows the opportunities. And whilst you're talking about, you've already touched on data. We've talked about the current deployments that we have and the role of that kind of private-public partnership, right? We actually have a question on that in the chat, which is, how can biometric and iris technology support data and ID authentication if the data is owned by the Ministry of Interior?
Great. To illustrate a very specific point, and also going back to how the technology works as well. We have currently, we also manage Palestinian. We just have signed a contract for UNRWA as well to manage Palestinian refugees, and that will be in 4 locations as well. Each of the databases of the IRIS are actually maintained completely separately. In fact, we do not have access to those databases. Those are the responsibility of what we would call the IRIS Trust Authority. So the Ministry of Interior is an IRIS Trust Authority. In Jordan, we have the National Aid Fund, we have the PSD as well. These are bodies that are specifically under the government of auspices. In the case of the UNHCR, well, I mentioned WFP, right? WFP actually doesn't have direct access to the irises. What it does is it has a sharing agreement with the UNHCR. But that sharing agreement is not to share the biometric. It is purely to share the case number. And that is actually what we use in the system. We verify using the algorithm of the template. No data is passed across the system. In terms of anything to do with the person themselves, it's completely anonymous. So you can operate a scheme whereby you provide a service with complete anonymity, but in real time. This is the important thing as well. This does not require databases, which is often a big issue, that people will have a copy of the database in different locations, etc. That can sometimes cause some issues if that happens, if one database disappears. No, you have somebody that you trust, and then you have a relationship, and this is where we fit in, being able to sort of sit in the middle. And I use the analogy of a debit card. This is quite a good way of looking at it, right? You use your debit card, put it in the bank. Okay, it's just a series of numbers that get verified. The actual service provider doesn't know anything about you. I could give my bank card to Eva. She could use my card quite happily. The system verifies that it is her. And that's how we managed to do this, by linking into MEPS, for instance, the Middle Eastern Payment System there as well. We have all of the links to go into that as well. So this is how you keep different sets of databases, but you can allow other people to use this effectively sat in the middle, but without any of them having access to the real data of the person. So we are very happy to work with both governments, private sector, and with other organizations.
Perfect. Great timing. Thank you, Simon.
Okay, good. We almost did it on time, which is unusual for me. Anyway.
Just want to say thank you again to both of you. If anyone is keen to connect with Eva or Simon, please do. They are available over the next 2 days. And thank you once again, both of you. Take care.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure as well. Bye-bye.
All the best.